They fired me for protocol violation, but what I actually did was save a patient they were ready to let die. This is how I made them pay. My name is Sarah. I'm 34 years old, and for 6 years I was an ICU nurse at Riverside Medical Center. 6 years of 12-hour night shifts, 6 years of holding hands while patients took their last breath, 6 years of watching doctors get the credit for saves that nurses made. I didn't complain. This is what I signed up for. I loved my job, I loved my patients, and that's exactly why they got rid of me. Because I cared more about a patient's life than I cared about the hospital's bottom line. Let me tell you something most people don't understand about modern hospitals. They're not just places of healing anymore. They're businesses. And businesses care about one thing: money. Riverside wasn't run by doctors. It was run by administrators, MBAs, people who'd never touched a patient but knew exactly how much each bed was worth per night. The CEO was a guy named Thomas Carr, mid-50s, sharp suit, corporate smile. He talked about patients like they were inventory. Length of stay, bed turnover, insurance reimbursement rates, profit margins. And his favorite phrase? Patient throughput. That's what he called it when he wanted us to discharge people faster. Not are they ready to go home, not are they stable, just get them out, make room, next patient. The pressure came down from administration to the doctors, and from the doctors to us nurses. Discharge faster, document less, move, move, move. And if you pushed back, if you said, hey, this patient isn't ready, you were labeled difficult, not a team player, problem employee. I'd watched 3 good nurses quit in 2 years because of the pressure. They couldn't take it anymore. I thought I could. I thought I was tougher. I was wrong. It started with a patient named Leonard Davis, 74 years old, retired postal worker, pneumonia. He'd been in our ICU for 9 days, slowly improving. His oxygen levels were getting better, his fever was down, but his lungs were still weak. He needed time. At least 3 more days of monitoring, maybe 5. But his insurance had stopped paying full rate. Now he was observation status, which meant the hospital was losing money every day he stayed. On day 9, the attending physician, Dr. Patel, wrote discharge orders. Mr. Davis was scheduled to go home in 24 hours. I saw the orders during my night shift, and immediately I knew something was wrong. I went to his room, checked his vitals. Oxygen saturation, 89%. Normal is 95 or above. He was still on supplemental oxygen, 4 liters per minute. His respiratory rate was 24. Normal is 12 to 20. He was working hard to breathe. And he had a low-grade fever, 99.2. Not high, but there. I looked at his chart. His chest X-ray from that morning still showed infiltrates, fluid in his lungs, not resolved. This man was not ready to go home, I paged Dr. Patel. It was 2 in the morning. He answered, annoyed. I said, Doctor, I'm looking at Mr. Davis. His O2 SAT is 89%. Respiratory rate 24. He still has a fever. I don't think he's ready for discharge. There was a pause. Then he said, He's fine, Sarah. He can use oxygen at home. I said, But his respiratory rate is elevated. He's working hard to breathe. What if he decompensates at home? He sighed, like I was wasting his time. Sarah, I've been doing this for 15 years. He's stable enough for home care. Discharge stands. I tried one more time. I said, Can we at least keep him 1 more day? Just to make sure? And he said, We need the bed. Discharge him tomorrow as planned. Then he hung up. I stood there at the nurse's station, holding the phone, angry, frustrated, scared, because I knew what would happen. I'd seen it before. Patient gets discharged too early, goes home, seems fine for a day or 2, then crashes, gets rushed back to the ER. Sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. And the hospital shrugs and says, complications happen, unforeseeable. But it wasn't unforeseeable, it was predictable. We just chose to ignore it because keeping him another 3 days would cost the hospital money. I thought about calling the nursing supervisor, but I knew what she'd say. Follow the doctor's orders, it's not your call. I thought about documenting my concerns in the chart. But what good would that do? A note buried in paperwork that nobody reads until it's too late. And then I thought, what if I just don't discharge him? What if I go over Dr. Patel's head? At 3 a.m, I did something I'd never done before. I called the chief medical officer, Dr. Rachel Nguyen. She answered on the fourth ring. Groggy. Sarah, what's wrong? Explained everything, the vitals, the fever, the x-ray, the discharge order, my concerns. I said, Dr. Nguyen, I really think this patient needs more time. I don't think he's stable enough to go home. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, What does the attending say? I hesitated. I said, Dr. Patel says he's fine, but I disagree. Another pause. Then, okay. Put a 72-hour hold on the discharge. I'll review his chart in the morning and make a decision. I exhaled. Thank you. She said, You did the right thing, Sarah. Patient safety first. And I believed her. The next morning I came in for my shift, and I was immediately called to the nurse manager's office. My manager, Linda, was there, so was Dr. Patel, and so was Thomas Carr, the CEO. I knew I was in trouble. Mr. Carr didn't waste time. He said, Miss Torres, you went over Dr. Patel's head last night. You called the CMO and countermanded a discharge order. I said, I had concerns about patient safety. He said, Your job is to follow orders, not question them. I said, My job is to advocate for my patients. Dr. Patel jumped in. He said, You undermined me. You made me look incompetent in front of the CMO. I said, I wasn't trying to undermine you. I was trying to protect the patient. Mr. Carr leaned forward. He said, Miss Torres, this hospital operates on efficiency. We have protocols. We have chain of command. When nurses start second-guessing doctors, the system breaks down. I said, and when we ignore patient safety, people die. Wrong answer. Mr. Carr opened a folder. He said, You've been written up twice this year for questioning discharge decisions. You've been labeled as difficult to work with by multiple physicians. I said, Because I speak up when I think something's wrong. He said, We're terminating your employment, effective immediately. I stared at him. What? Linda handed me a paper, termination notice, reason, insubordination, violation of chain of command. I said, You're firing me for trying to save a patient? Mr. Carr stood up. He said, We're firing you for not following protocol. Security will escort you out. And just like that, 6 years of my life was over. But here's what they didn't know. Mr. Davis stayed those 72 hours because Dr. Nguyen had put the hold in place before I was fired. And on day 2 of that hold at 11 p.m., Mr. Davis went into respiratory distress. His oxygen dropped to 78%. His breathing became labored. He was barely conscious. The ICU team intubated him, put him on a ventilator, treated him for acute respiratory failure. If he'd been at home, he would have died. Instead, he spent 4 more days in the ICU, then he recovered. Fully. He walked out of that hospital 2 weeks later, because I refused to let him go home too early. And they fired me for it. I went home that day in shock. I couldn't believe what had just happened. 6 years. 6 years of night shifts. 6 years of missing birthdays and holidays. 6 years of watching people die and holding their families while they cried. And they fired me in 10 minutes. I sat in my apartment, alone, staring at the wall, and I felt this rage building inside me. Not just at Mr. Carr, not just at Dr. Patel, at the whole system. At every hospital that treats nurses like we're replaceable, at every administrator who cares more about money than patients, at every doctor who thinks our concerns don't matter. I was done being quiet. I was done being professional. I was done accepting that this is just how things are. So I made a decision. I was going to fight back. I opened my laptop, and I started gathering evidence. Here's something they didn't think about when they fired me. I'd been documenting everything for 6 years. Every time I was told to discharge a patient I thought wasn't ready, I made a note in my personal log. Every time a doctor dismissed my concerns, I saved the email. I recorded the conversation in my journal. Every time administration pushed for faster turnover, I kept the memos. I had everything. I pulled up my files. 6 years of documentation, hundreds of entries. Patient names, dates, doctor names, specific concerns I'd raised, what happened to those patients after discharge. And I found patterns. There were at least 15 cases in the last 2 years where I'd raised concerns about early discharge, 15 patients I thought weren't ready. I tracked what happened to them. 7 of them were readmitted within 72 hours. 3 ended up back in the ICU. 1 died. 15 warnings. 15 times I was told I was being too cautious. 15 times I was right. I organized everything into a timeline. I made copies. I backed everything up to 3 different drives. And then I called a lawyer. Her name was Jennifer Kim, employment attorney, specializes in healthcare whistleblower cases. I met her in her office 3 days after I was fired. I brought all my documentation, printed, organized, labeled. She spent 2 hours going through everything, not saying much, just reading, taking notes. Finally, she looked up at me. She said, "Sarah, do you understand what you have here?" I said, "Evidence that I was fired for doing my job?" She said, "You have evidence of a systemic pattern of prioritizing profit over patient safety. You have documentation of retaliation against a healthcare worker for advocating for patients. This is huge." I felt my heart racing. I said, "Can we sue them?" She smiled. She said, "We're going to do better than that. We're going to make them settle. Because if this goes to trial and becomes public, the hospital will be destroyed." She explained the strategy. We'd file a wrongful termination lawsuit. We'd include all my documentation. We'd subpoena the hospital's records to show the pattern. We'd prove that Riverside Medical Center had a policy of early discharge to maximize profits, and that I was fired for refusing to participate in unsafe practices. I said, "How long will this take?" She said, "Could be 6 months, could be 2 years. But we'll win. I guarantee it." I signed the papers that day. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later, and the hospital panicked. Because my lawyer didn't just sue for wrongful termination, she sued for patient endangerment, for systematic negligence, for retaliation against a whistleblower. And she named names: Thomas Carr, Dr. Patel, the nursing manager, the hospital board. Suddenly, this wasn't just a disgruntled employee complaining. This was a legal threat to the hospital's accreditation, their reputation, their license to operate. Within 3 days, Riverside's legal team reached out. They wanted to talk settlement. My lawyer said, "Not yet. We're just getting started." She subpoenaed 5 years of hospital records, patient discharge data, readmission rates, insurance billing practices, internal memos from administration. And what we found was worse than I thought. Riverside had one of the highest early discharge rates in the state. Their average length of stay was 30% shorter than comparable hospitals. And their readmission rate, 42% higher than the state average. That means patients were coming back. Over and over, because they were being sent home too soon. But here's the sick part. Readmissions are profitable because insurance pays again. They were discharging patients early, knowing they'd come back, because it generated more revenue. It wasn't just negligence, it was a business model. My lawyer leaked the story to a local news reporter, not the lawsuit itself, just the readmission data. The headline was, "Local Hospitals' Readmission Rates Raise Questions About Patient Safety." It went viral locally. Patients started coming forward, families who'd lost loved ones, other nurses who'd been pressured to discharge patients early. The state medical board opened an investigation. The hospital's accreditation was put under review. And Riverside's legal team came back. This time they were serious about settling. They offered me $50,000 to drop the lawsuit, sign an NDA, go away quietly. My lawyer laughed. She said, "Try again." They came back with $150,000. My lawyer said, "We're not interested in money. We want policy change." That's when they realized we weren't going to just go away. The settlement took 4 months to negotiate, but in the end, we got everything. $250,000, tax-free, plus my legal fees covered. But more importantly, we got policy changes. Riverside Medical Center was required to implement a patient safety advocacy program. Any nurse or staff member could flag a patient as not ready for discharge, and that flag couldn't be overridden without a peer review. They had to hire an independent patient safety officer, someone not employed by the hospital, to audit discharge decisions. They had to publicly report their readmission rates every quarter on their website. And here's the big one: no employee could be disciplined or terminated for raising patient safety concerns. Ever. It was written into hospital policy. Thomas Carr resigned 2 months after the settlement, officially to pursue other opportunities, really because the board forced him out. Dr. Patel? Still there. But a lot quieter now, and a lot more willing to listen to nurses. My nursing manager was reassigned to a desk job, no more patient contact. And me? I got my license reinstated, I got a written apology from the hospital board, and I got a job offer from a competing hospital that had heard about the case. But I didn't take it. I'm now a patient safety educator at a teaching hospital across the state. I train new nurses. I teach them something they don't learn in nursing school: how to advocate for patients, how to push back when something doesn't feel right, how to document everything. And I tell them my story. All of it: the discharge order, the phone call, the firing, the lawsuit. I tell them, your license isn't just a piece of paper, it's your voice, it's your power, use it. Because here's what I learned: hospitals are businesses, but we're not. We're healthcare workers, and our job isn't to protect the bottom line, it's to protect our patients. Even when it costs us our job, even when it costs us our career, because some things are worth fighting for. Mr. Leonard Davis sent me a card 6 months after I was fired. He didn't know about the lawsuit. He didn't know I'd been terminated. He just wanted to thank the nurse who insisted he stay in the hospital. He said, "You saved my life." And you know what? He was right. I did save his life. They fired me for it, but I'd do it again. Because in healthcare, silence isn't professionalism, it's complicity. And I refuse to be silent. If you're a healthcare worker watching this, and you've been pressured to compromise patient safety, document everything, speak up, fight back. Because they can fire you, but they can't take your integrity. This is Sarah Torres, and this is my story.